The particular part of the Chieftainship Act that we are challenging is called Section 10, and what it provides for is for succession to chieftainship. And what it particularly says is that the firstborn son is allowed to succeed to chieftainship. What it makes clear is that the son has to be a legitimate son under customary law, but it's also clear that it's a son and not a daughter. And in this particular case, you have an applicant called Senate Masupha, who is the firstborn child of a chief, and her father passed away, and her mother took over the chieftainship for a short period of time, and now her mother has passed away, and there's been a question as to who should inherit or should succeed to the chieftainship. And she's arguing that given the fact that she is now the firstborn child, she should be succeeding or be eligible to succeed to chieftainship.
And now the SALC is filing submissions to the country's constitutional court. Tell us more on the argument behind the repeal.
The SALC, my organization, has intervened as friends of the court. What we've decided to do is just brief the court on the Lesotho constitutional law and also Lesotho's international law obligations on why it should strike down this law that discriminates on the basis of gender. And particularly what we're saying is that this law violates Lesotho's constitution because it provides for freedom from discrimination, and it also provides for the right to equality. And in this case, it's very clear that if women cannot succeed to the chieftainship, it's gender discrimination. The other thing that we're arguing is that these rights, the freedom from discrimination and equality, also exist under Lesotho's international law obligations. These are treaties that Lesotho has signed along with numbers of other countries that say we won't discriminate in our country. And then finally, what we're also arguing is that, Lesotho, like a lot of countries in Southern Africa, has an incredibly high HIV prevalence rate. And one of the things that we know helps stop HIV is eradicating gender discrimination from laws. Because right now, because of the entrenched gender discrimination in Lesotho and in other countries, it's hard for women to protect themselves against HIV. So we're saying that just end gender discrimination in your legal system, and maybe the government will have more resources to actually fight HIV.
Speaking of gender discrimination, the case is said to be part of a broader trend in the region to change or repeal laws which explicitly promote gender discrimination. So generally speaking, how is the situation of gender discrimination in the country?
So Lesotho's actually made quite a bit of progress so far on gender discrimination. In the last 10 years, it's passed a law that has abolished what we call marital power, which means that prior to the passing of this law, women were considered minors. So first they were minors under their parents, but then even once they reached the age of majority and got married, they were minors under their husband. So they weren't allowed to sign for property, they weren't allowed to, sign for bank accounts, etc. And Lesotho, I think, very bravely passed a law that eradicated that. They've also done a lot of gender awareness work to ensure that gender-based violence is ended. And we see this as just part of a process that Lesotho is going through where it does need to stop gender discrimination in the country. And you'll see that a lot of other countries in Southern Africa have done similar things. So for example, in Botswana, they've struck down laws that actually discriminate against women on the basis of just being women. They've done the same thing in South Africa.
Can we go back to HIV epidemic in Lesotho, which you just touched on? The SALC also argues that discriminatory laws against women harm the government's ability to effectively respond to the country's HIV epidemic. How so as far as chieftaincy is concerned? How will having a female chief help eradicate the country's high HIV prevalence?
The argument that we're making is that what we know from the data so far is that discrimination on the basis of gender in a country actually makes women more likely and more susceptible to HIV, and it also means that women are less likely to have the means to deal with having HIV, to get the treatment that they need. And what we're arguing is that countries need to do is eradicate all of these laws that discriminate on the basis of gender, because then you're creating a society where women are seen as equals. When you have a law that denies women from succeeding to chieftainship, which is one of a senior leadership position within communities, then you're basically supporting supporting this idea that women are not equal to men. And that, as a broader view within society, actually makes it harder for women to protect themselves against HIV.
And what's the view of Lesotho's chiefs? Do they also believe that the Chieftainship Act is unjust?
I think that there's differing opinions among people. I know that there was a senior person in Lesotho who's actually called for a change to the particular provision of the Chieftainship Act, but then there are also people who disagree and think that we should be keeping it. I think that what's important here is that we're asking the Constitutional Court of Lesotho to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution in this matter is very clear, which is that you cannot discriminate against women for no apparent reason.
And finally, when can a decision regarding the case brought forward be expected?
We're hopefully expecting a decision later this year, and the court actually will be hearing this case. They'll be hearing from both sides and also from us at the end of February of this year. So we're hoping that the court will then issue its decision later in 2012.